The landing of the ship on planet Zarnox 7 was far from gentle. The ship's hull creaked as it descended through the dense atmosphere, sending shudders through the metal frame. Outside, thick green fog seemed to blanket the world below, shrouding the landscape in an eerie, haunting mist. The crew members inside the ship could hear the low hum of the engine, but it was drowned out by the strange howls echoing from the distant jungle. The sounds were sharp, unsettling, and filled with the unmistakable tension of a wild world that had never known peace. Jason Kane, the only human on board, had a smile on his face, an expression that would be seen as both foolish and brave by those around him. He stood up from his seat, stretching his arms as the ship finally settled on the uneven terrain. "Smells like adventure," Jason said, his voice full of excitement. But it was a tone that contrasted sharply with the silent apprehension in the air. Zira, a member of the crew and one of the few alien species in the galaxy with violet skin and piercing blue eyes, glared at him. She was tall and had an air of seriousness that didn't fit with Jason's carefree attitude. "Smells like death, human," Zira muttered under her breath. Her eyes scanned the planet's wild surface. Through the window. "We're only here to study the creature," she added, her tone colder than usual. "Not to play hero." The creature Zira was referring to was the Threxan beast, a monster that had terrorized entire systems and was known across the galaxy for its viciousness. A predator with an appetite for destruction, it was one of the few creatures that even the Galactic Council feared. The beast had no mercy. It had torn apart military ships and obliterated entire cities, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. Yet, for all the stories of its deadly nature, no one had truly understood the creature. All that was known was that it was a nightmare given form. But now, the Threxan was trapped, and that was why Jason and the rest of the crew were there. The beast had been cornered in a massive canyon on Zarnox 7 after a violent battle with an unknown enemy. It had been injured in the skirmish and had fallen into the ravine. Now, it was stuck, unable to climb out. The ship had landed close to the edge of the canyon, where the crew could set up a base to observe the creature. From their position on the ridge above, they could hear the low growls and roars of the beast, deep and rumbling, a warning to all who dared approach. Jason, however, didn't seem to share the same fear as the rest of the crew. While Zira and the others set up their equipment and prepared to document the creature's behavior, Jason couldn't take his eyes off the canyon below. He leaned against the ship's railing, staring down at the Threxan's glowing eyes. The creature's massive body was partly obscured by shadows, but Jason could still see its glowing red streaks, like molten lava flowing through its black scales. There was an unmistakable sense of power in those eyes, an untamed force of nature, locked in a cage of its own pain and rage. But Jason wasn't afraid. Instead, he felt something more powerful, compassion. "I don't think it's angry," Jason said quietly, not taking his eyes off the Threxan. "I think it's scared." Zira, who had been preparing her notes on the creature, turned and shot him a sharp look. "Scared?" she repeated with disbelief. "That thing is a killing machine, Jason. It has wiped out entire colonies. It isn't just scared. It's a monster." Jason didn't respond at first. His thoughts were too focused on the Threxan, whose violent roars and claws scraping against the rocks echoed through the canyon. The beast wasn't acting like a mindless monster. It wasn't charging or attacking anything in sight. Instead, it was trapped and frustrated, trying to find a way out of its prison. Jason's heart went out to it, and despite all the warnings, despite the fear running through his veins, he knew something had to be done. The Threxan was not the mindless killer that everyone assumed it was. There was more to the story, something that was not being told. And Jason was determined to figure it out. Later that night, when the others were resting in the camp, Jason quietly slipped away. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. As he crept down the side of the canyon, he felt the weight of his decision. It was dangerous. It was reckless. But it was also something that had to be done. He couldn't sit back and watch as the galaxy feared and misunderstood the Threxen, labeling it as nothing more than a monster to be destroyed. There had to be more to it than that, and Jason would find out what it was. The canyon walls were steep and jagged, but Jason moved with determination, using his training as a soldier to scale the rocky cliffs. His flashlight bounced off the stone as he carefully made his way down, the sounds of the Threxen's growls growing louder as he got closer. The air was thick with tension, and Jason could feel the weight of the beast's presence even before he saw it. His heart raced, but he pushed the fear aside. He had to get closer. He had to make contact. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jason reached the bottom of the canyon. He crouched low, his eyes scanning the area for the Threxen. The beast was there, just a few feet away, its eyes glowing in the darkness like twin embers in the night. The creature was still, its massive body partially hidden by the shadows, but Jason could see the muscles twitching in its limbs as it waited, watching him. Jason took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Hey, big guy," he whispered softly, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. He didn't want to provoke the creature. "I'm not here to hurt you." The Threxen's golden eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, nothing happened. Time seemed to slow. The only sound the beating of Jason's heart and the faint wind that stirred the fog. Then, the creature let out a low growl, not a threatening one, but a sound of confusion. It sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring, its claws digging into the ground. Jason didn't move. He stayed where he was, still as a rock, letting the beast examine him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he repeated, his voice soft but firm. And then, to his amazement, the Threxen did something unexpected. It stopped growling and lowered its head, a low purr vibrating from its throat. Jason blinked in surprise, his mind struggling to understand. This wasn't the violent predator he had heard about. This was something else entirely. Slowly, cautiously, Jason extended his hand toward the beast, hoping that it would trust him. The Threxen's glowing eyes never left him as it shifted its massive body, moving ever so slightly toward him, as if considering the human's offer. In that moment, Jason knew something the rest of the crew didn't. The Threxen was not the monster the galaxy feared. It was something far more complex, something that needed understanding, not fear, and he was going to be the one to prove it. Jason had never been one to shy away from the unknown, and as the massive, terrifying creature before him lowered its head in what could only be described as an invitation, he felt a deep sense of awe and responsibility. The Threxen, often described as the galaxy's deadliest predator, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't attacking, nor did it show the aggression that had been its signature for years. No, this creature was watching him, studying him perhaps, in the same way that Jason was studying it. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear but from an overwhelming sense of curiosity. There was something about the Threxen, something hidden behind its primal ferocity, something that the galaxy had failed to understand for all these years. Jason's hand remained extended, trembling ever so slightly. Every fiber of his being told him that this was a risk, one that could end his life in an instant. But there was also something else, a strange bond that seemed to pulse between them. The beast's glowing eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, time stood still. Gee. Threxen's massive body, built for destruction, was now still. The growls that had filled the air with a menacing rumble had quieted, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate with the planet itself. Jason took a slow breath, his mind focused on the moment. He wasn't sure what this creature wanted or why it was so still, but he knew this was a chance to break the pattern, a chance to see beyond the monster and into the creature's soul. Then, something shifted. The Threxen made a soft sound, something between a low growl and a rumbling sigh. Its massive form slowly lowered to the ground, its tail flicking lazily behind it. Jason could hardly believe what he was witnessing. It was like the beast was becoming docile. The violent, relentless predator that had terrorized so many worlds was now showing an almost tender side, one that Jason couldn't have predicted in his wildest dreams. Still, Jason remained cautious. His instincts told him to be careful, even if the creature seemed passive now. He lowered his hand slightly, trying to read the Threxen's body language. Was it truly harmless, or was this some kind of trap? Despite the clear danger, he found himself inching closer, drawn to the creature in a way that defied logic. This wasn't just about the beast anymore. It was about understanding something much deeper. Jason could feel the tension in the air, the strange pulse of energy that surrounded them both. It was a moment of pure connection, a bridge between human and alien, between fear and curiosity. The Threxen's eyes followed every move he made, its head tilting slightly, as if processing the strange, delicate creature standing before it. Jason could hear his own breath, shallow but steady, as he took another small step forward. He was close now, so close he could feel the heat radiating off the Threxen's massive body. The creature's thick, black scales shimmered in the dim light, and its claws, each as long as a human arm, rested on the ground with a quiet grace that defied its reputation. And then it happened. The Threxen's great head lowered even further, bringing its eyes to the level of Jason's chest. There was a glimmer of recognition, of understanding, in those glowing red eyes, and Jason found himself speaking before he even knew what words would come out. "It's okay," he said quietly, his voice soft and steady, more to calm himself than to reassure the creature. "I won't hurt you. I just want to help." The Threxen's response was subtle but unmistakable. Its giant muscular tail twitched again, brushing the rocky ground behind it with a force that sent small rocks skittering across the canyon floor. Jason took a hesitant step forward, slowly closing the distance. He could almost hear the creature's breath now, deep and measured, as though it was considering what to do next. The tension in the air was thick, but there was no aggression, no hunger, only a silent understanding that, for this brief moment, they were not enemies. Jason reached out again, this time closer, but the Threxen made no move to stop him. Its enormous head remained lowered, and its glowing eyes watched him with a strange intensity. Jason's hand brushed lightly against the creature's scaled hide, and he felt a shock run through him, not from the touch itself, but from the connection it seemed to create. It was as if the Threxen had reached out too in its own way. The energy in the air shifted, a quiet, unspoken communication that passed between them in that instant. The Threxen's purring hum deepened, vibrating through Jason's chest as he stood there, palm pressed against the creature's scales. The sound was alien but strangely comforting. It was a strange sensation, feeling the massive creature's presence, knowing that it could crush him in an instant if it chose to. But it hadn't. And Jason, despite everything, still believed that there was more to the Threxen than the galaxy had been led to believe. Behind him, he could hear footsteps. He turned quickly, and his heart sank as he saw Zyra and the others from the crew approaching cautiously. Zyra's eyes widened in disbelief when she saw Jason standing there, his hand on the Threxen's side. She didn't even try to hide the shock and disbelief on her face. "Jason, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp with both anger and fear. "You're insane! That thing will kill you!" Jason turned to face her, a calmness in his eyes that contrasted sharply with the panic in the voices of the crew. "No," he said simply. "It won't." He looked back at the Threxen, whose eyes followed his every movement. Jason could see the creature's posture shift again, more relaxed now, as if understanding the human's words. It seemed to trust him, even if it didn't fully comprehend him. It's not what everyone thinks, Jason continued, his voice firm. This creature isn't a mindless killer. It's something else. Something misunderstood. Zira stepped forward, disbelief still written all over her face. You're crazy, she muttered under her breath, but she didn't move closer. Instead, she stood frozen, her eyes never leaving the Threxen. You're going to get us all killed, Jason shook his head. No, I'm not. I'm just trying to understand it. He turned to face the creature again, placing his other hand on its side, feeling the warmth of its body. I think it's been misunderstood for too long. The crew watched in stunned silence as Jason continued to stand before the Threxen, its massive body looming over him, yet it remained perfectly still. There was no aggression, no anger, only an overwhelming sense of something ancient, something forgotten, and something far more complex than anyone had realized. In that moment, Jason knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had feared the Threxen for all the wrong reasons, and he, Jason Kane, was the one who would change that. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Jason stood before the Threxen, the galaxy's most feared predator. Zira and the crew watched from a distance, their fear palpable. Despite their warnings and disbelief, Jason remained calm. He could feel the heat from the creature's massive body, the subtle vibrations that rippled through the air as the Threxen breathed. There was an understanding between them now, something deeper than mere survival instincts. Jason sensed it with every fiber of his being. The creature was not attacking. It was not showing any signs of aggression. It was simply there, waiting. And it had allowed Jason to approach it, to touch it, without any sign of harm. This was more than just a moment of survival. It was a moment of discovery. Jason knew that he was standing at the edge of something that could change everything. Zira, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief, took a tentative step forward. Her voice trembled as she called out to him. Jason, you have to stop. That thing is a monster, a killing machine. You don't know what you're doing. Her words echoed in the stillness of the canyon, but Jason didn't flinch. He didn't even look back. He knew she was afraid, and perhaps for good reason. The Threxen was not just any predator. It was a creature that had been known to destroy entire fleets with a single roar. It was the epitome of terror in the galaxy, the living embodiment of destruction. Yet, standing here, Jason felt none of that terror. Instead, there was a strange peace, a quiet understanding that had been born between him and the creature. Something that no one had ever seen before. The crew murmured among themselves, some of them looking at each other in disbelief, others watching Jason with wide eyes, uncertain of what was unfolding before them. They had been on countless missions, faced danger at every turn, but nothing like this. Nothing that could explain why the Threxen, a creature so deadly, would tolerate Jason's presence. It was impossible. But the more they watched, the more they began to question everything they thought they knew about the Threxen. Jason took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving the Threxen. The creature's massive form loomed before him, but there was no aggression in its posture. Instead, it seemed curious. The red glow of its eyes softened, the intense fire that had once marked it as a predator fading into something more neutral, more inquisitive. Jason, ever aware of the precariousness of the situation, carefully chose his next words. "You're not a monster," he whispered, his voice barely audible. It was more to himself than to the creature, but the words carried weight. "You're just misunderstood. The galaxy has been so afraid of you, but I don't think you're the real threat here." As Jason spoke, the Threxen's massive head lowered, its eyes narrowing slightly as though it were contemplating his words. Jason, feeling the pulse of connection between them, continued. "You've been taught to fight, to kill. That's what everyone expects from you. but that's not who you are. I can see that now. I think we can help each other." Behind him, Zyra's voice broke through the moment. "Jason, stop!" she cried out again, more forcefully this time. Her words were full of panic, but Jason didn't turn. He couldn't. This was a pivotal moment, and if he turned away, if he backed down now, it would all be for nothing. He had to prove, to himself and to the galaxy, that there was more to this creature than violence. The Threxen's head tilted slightly, as if considering Jason's words. The glowing red eyes flickered, their fiery intensity dimming ever so slightly. The creature's breathing slowed, becoming more rhythmic, more controlled. Jason's hand remained gently placed on its side, feeling the warmth radiate from its massive body. The Threxen's muscles, which had once rippled with a tension ready to snap, seemed to relax. It was as if the beast was responding to his presence, responding to something Jason had said, something no one had ever said before. Zyra, her voice now shaky with a mix of disbelief and awe, took another step forward. You actually think it's listening to you?" Her tone was incredulous, as though she couldn't fathom the possibility. "Jason, it's a wild animal. It'll turn on you in an instant. You're playing with fire." Jason didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached out with his other hand, gently touching the Threxen's scaled neck. The creature's massive head remained still, watching him with those glowing eyes. Jason could feel the power in its body, the raw strength that could snap him in half without effort. But there was no malice, no rage, no hunger. Just a quiet, waiting, as though it was waiting for something, waiting for him to make the next move. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It was a low, rumbling growl, but not the vicious roar that Jason had expected. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was something else. A soft, almost contented sound. The Threxen's large tail flicked lazily behind it, brushing against the ground in a rhythmic motion. It was like the creature was purring. The sound was deep and resonant, vibrating through the air and sending a shockwave of disbelief through the crew. They had never heard a Threxen make such a sound before. It was as though the creature had lowered its guard completely, a stark contrast to the fierce and untamable image it had once projected. Zyra, now at a loss for words, stood frozen, her eyes locked on the creature. Her hand trembled as she reached for the communicator on her belt, unsure of what to do. She had seen dangerous creatures before, but nothing like this. Nothing had ever challenged her perception of what was possible, of what could be tamed or befriended. This was different. This was something entirely new. She could see it now. The way Jason stood there, calm and collected, his hand resting on the Threxen as though they were old friends. It wasn't just the creature that had changed. Something about Jason had shifted too. He had found a way to connect, to reach beyond the surface of the beast and see something no one had ever seen before. The crew continued to watch, some still skeptical, others in awe. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting, caught in the tension of this moment, unsure of what would happen next. Jason had done what no one had thought possible. He had befriended the galaxy's deadliest creature, the very beast that had struck terror into the hearts of all who crossed its path. And in that moment, as the Threxen lowered its head further, its massive body relaxing under Jason's touch, it became clear that everything they knew about the creature was wrong. Jason had proved that, despite its fearsome reputation, the Threxen was not a mindless killer. It was something else entirely, and the galaxy would never be the same again. As the days passed, the crew of the Galactic Explorer witnessed something that defied all logic and understanding. Jason, having befriended the Threxen, became the center of attention on the ship. Zyra, initially the biggest skeptic, began to quietly observe the bond forming between him and the creature. Despite the skepticism and fear that lingered in the hearts of the crew, one undeniable truth emerged. The Threxen had changed. No longer the terrifying monster of galactic lore, the creature had become something else entirely. It no longer reacted with aggression to anyone who approached, and when Jason walked through the ship's corridors, the massive beast followed him, its heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet halls like a shadow of his every move. One evening, as Jason and the Threxen sat together on the observation deck, the vastness of the galaxy sprawled out before them. A soft hum filled the air as the ship cruised through hyperspace. Jason's calm demeanor and the Threxen's relaxed form made for a surreal scene. A being once feared throughout the galaxy now laid its head peacefully on the deck, watching the stars outside with curiosity. It was the first time in the history of the galaxy that such an event had occurred. No one had ever imagined that a creature so deadly, so beyond control, could form any kind of meaningful connection with a human. Yet here they were, two beings from different worlds, sharing a moment of stillness. Zira, now less guarded, approached cautiously, her eyes darting between the two. She was still grappling with the impossibility of it all, but found herself growing, less fearful with each passing day. "Jason," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant, as if not wanting to disturb the tranquility. I can't believe it. Every part of me tells me this shouldn't be happening. That thing is still the Threxen. It's still dangerous. But I see it now. It's different." "What did you do?" Jason looked up at her, a serene smile on his face. His eyes reflected the depth of understanding he had gained. He leaned back against the cold metal of the deck and let out a long breath. "I didn't do anything. I just listened." His words were simple, but carried a weight that Zira felt in the pit of her stomach. "I realized something. This creature isn't just a monster. It's a survivor, just like us. It's been conditioned to be a weapon, to be feared, but that's not all it is. It doesn't need to be a weapon. It wants something more." Zira felt a flicker of understanding, but the enormity of what Jason was suggesting still overwhelmed her. "But how do you know?" she asked, almost pleading for a logical explanation. "How can you be so sure? It's a predator. It's not like anything we've ever faced before." Jason turned his gaze back to the Threxen, who had now raised its head and was observing the stars, its eyes glimmering with what almost looked like wonder. "Because," Jason said, his voice low, "I've seen what it's capable of. It could have destroyed us all by now, but it hasn't. It's not what we thought it was. It's something different, something misunderstood. And we can learn from that." Zira hesitated, her mind still racing. She could see the sincerity in Jason's eyes, the way he spoke with such conviction, but the voice of caution inside her could not be easily silenced. She had seen firsthand what the Threxen could do when provoked. Its speed, its strength, its sheer destructive power. Those were not things that could be ignored. But Jason was right about one thing. The creature had not attacked. It had allowed them to approach. It had responded to Jason's touch, to his voice, with a gentleness no one had ever thought possible. And now it lay beside him, docile and calm. Zira, still grappling with the new reality before her, sat down across from Jason. She wanted to ask so many questions, but one in particular stood out. What now? What do we do with this creature? Jason thought for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the Threxen. "I think it's time for the galaxy to see it for what it really is. Not as a monster, not as a weapon, but as a being capable of understanding. We've all been taught to fear it, but maybe we're the ones who've been wrong all along." Zira stared at him in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. They had both grown up with the same stories, the same legends of the Threxen as a creature of death and destruction. Yet here was Jason, standing beside it, talking as though it was no different from any other being in the galaxy. Zira wasn't sure if she believed it yet, but she could feel something inside her shifting. Maybe, just maybe, Jason was right. Maybe the Threxen wasn't a threat after all. The days that followed saw the crew and the Threxen growing accustomed to one another. The creature, once a terror to all, now roamed the ship, no longer a force of fear, but a silent companion. The crew still kept their distance, unsure of how to behave around it. But they could not deny the strange, growing bond between Jason and the Threxen. The ship's sensors picked up fewer signs of aggression from the creature. It was no longer a ticking time bomb. Instead, it was a part of the ship's ecosystem, just as alive as any of them. And then, one fateful day, the Threxen did something no one had expected. A fleet of hostile ships appeared on the ship's radar, their weapons armed and ready for battle. The crew went into high alert, preparing for a fight they knew they might not survive. But as the enemy ships closed in, something unexpected happened. The Threxen, which had been calmly lying near the ship's engine room, suddenly rose to its feet. Its massive form loomed on the horizon, casting a long shadow across the ship. The crew, paralyzed with fear, watched as it moved toward the ship's front viewport, its body rippling with energy. Jason stood up, his heart racing. He looked at Zira, who was already staring at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jason's eyes never left the Threxen. He knew what it was about to do. "It's protecting us." The Threxen, in a movement so fast it seemed almost unreal, shot toward the enemy ships, its massive claws slashing through space like a living comet. The crew watched in awe as the creature engaged the fleet, its actions swift and precise. The enemy ships, caught off guard by the Threxen's sudden appearance, scrambled to retaliate, but it was no use. The Threxen moved with a deadly grace, dismantling the enemy vessels one by one, its roars shaking the stars themselves. It was no longer the monster they had feared. It was their protector. Jason stood there, watching the battle unfold, a quiet smile on his face. He had not tamed the Threxen. He had freed it. And in doing so, he had unlocked the creature's true potential. Not as a mindless weapon, but as a being capable of great things. The galaxy would never see the Threxen the same way again. And neither would Jason. For in the end, he had found something in the creature that no one else had ever imagined. A friend, a protector, a partner in a world full of chaos. The galaxy's deadliest creature had become its most powerful ally, and it all began with one human who believed that even the monsters deserved a chance to be understood.